Hello, my name is Alex with David Tutorials, and today we're going to be wrapping up our series on project settings for Jira project administrators. We're just going to finish up talking about components, Ops Genie, ever so slightly, permissions, which is probably where we're going to spend the bulk of this video, issue security, notification, development tools, issue collectors, and finally, we're going to wrap this up with Slack integration. Now, if you haven't seen the other videos, this is the final in this series. So you're going to want to check out the first few videos so that you can catch up and get up to speed. Please make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you drop a like. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. And we're going to jump into this video. Let's get started. All right, so we're going to be talking about components here. Now, there's three really different ways that I like to describe components, right? So we're going to talk about how Atlassian defines it as shown on the screen here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. We're going to talk about components on how I have teams use components. And then we're going to talk about components and as a third way that I usually make a recommendation if teams aren't using components. Now, before we get started though, components are an optional field, right? They're not a required field. They're just an augmentation of Jira that allow you to organize and bucketize, categorize, compartmentalize, whatever adjective you want to use there for your data, okay? Atlassian defines components as a subsection of a project. Use them to group issues within a project into smaller parts. What that means to me is like, if you're building an aircraft, you're not going to build the whole aircraft in one shot, right? You're going to have the nose, you're going to have the fuselage, you're going to have the wings, landing gear, the tail, a bunch of different components that ultimately when they come together, they make up an aircraft. So for you specifically, you want to kind of visualize your project or your program or whatever you're working on here that you're trying to track in Jira and think about how can I break it down to smaller parts that logically make sense. Now, keep in mind, this isn't supposed to replace like epics or releases, right? They're supposed to augment. And so they're just helping you. It's going to kind of cut into my third description of how I use components, right? But components is really just like a label, right? It's just an ability for you to sort your data and kind of help you triage or adjudicate your issues when you're reviewing them to determine priority and schedule and things of that nature, right? So it's there to help you, not to confuse you, but that's the first one. The second way to use components is to use them kind of how like the Lego bricks are here. But my description of the second method, right, if you're not using it to basically subcategorize your project, is to use it almost like as a replacement for a label. So a lot of teams like to use labels because labels are great, they're powerful. They help you, again, segregate and catalog and categorize your data. Problem with labels is when you try to use the label, if somebody fat fingers the value of a label, you're gonna have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different labels. So you don't want that. And so within this components, you have the ability to create names here, a subcomponent. You have the ability to give it a description, assign it to a lead, hit save. And so when you do this and you go to create an issue now, your component that I just created, a subcomponent, is going to show up as an option. So this is a great way for you as a project administrator to create values in a field that your team can leverage without having to depend on labels. So this is independent of how Jira or Atlassian define components, as we talked about the first part, right? And this is more along the lines of, hey, I don't want my team fat fingering or accidentally misusing labels. Let's just create some components to, again, slap a sticker on issues so that we can then filter, query, look them up later, right? And help with the adjudication process. That's the second way. And the third way, or the third description of a component, is kind of somewhere in between the two, right? Where a lot of people get caught up, again, they're like, well, what's the difference between an epic and a component, right? And it's not that they're different, right? These are all fields to help complement you. The tricky part, how much is too much, right? How much information is information overload, right? Because a lot of teams think of epics, they'll think of epics incorrectly, and they almost have like an epic per component. But that's too macro still for an epic, right? You want a lot of those epics to be part of a bigger deliverable or a bigger part of the system, right? Hence, enter the components. So your components are there too. Maybe you have tasks that are assigned to a specific team or a type of team, right? So maybe you have like a front-end development team. And so you can assign a bunch of epics to that team. And you use that by, again, leveraging that component field. Because that component, again, it's literally the most fundamental way of thinking about it is it's just there for you to bucketize your data. And so treat it as that, and I think you're going to be fine. There's no hard set rule. There's no law that says a component has to be a subset of the system. I've given you 3 recommendations, one that's clear cut, one that's like my way, and one that's in between. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section and I'll try to address them. You have some creative freedom here, right? At the end of the day, what is important is that you pick something that your team all agrees with. And as long as there's clear communication there, this component field can be whatever you want, right? So don't dwell too much on like, are we doing it right? It's more of like, is it being valuable, right? And so focus on that. Next up, Ops Genie, right? So this is going to be a feature that I'm going to skip over. We're only going to talk about it here for a few seconds. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is if your team has invested in Ops Genie, which implies that you have Jira Service Management, then this is going to be a cool tool to integrate to your Jira project. With that said, 99.999% of the teams that I've coached, they're not using Ops Genie. So I'm going to skip over this. If there's enough interest, drop it in the comment section. I'll go do some videos on Ops Genie in the future. This is a feature that if you are running like a full IT shop, you definitely want to be considering, but we're going to leave an in-depth description and breakdown of what Ops Genie is for a future video. So let's move on to permissions. This is perhaps one of the most overly complex parts of a company managed Jira project, but you're here, you're in good hands. Let's talk about it in a high level. I do want to reserve an in-depth permission scheme overview for a dedicated series of videos because there is a lot happening here and I want to do something with a little bit more visual. But in a nutshell, I'm going to give you the 30,000 view here, okay? I'm going to give you the important stuff too that you need to kind of just know so you can get started. But before we do that, also know that you are basically, to make any changes, you will need to be a site administrator. So I'm going to approach this from just the fundamentals so that you understand what's happening here, so that you have enough knowledge to then go talk to your site administrator so that they can help you out. Okay, so unlike a team managed project, where in a team managed project, you have basically a light switch. You're either given access or you're not, and that's it. You have one little configuration within the team one, and that is you can add an admin, right? So now you have the ability to delete and admin the project. So it's really like light switch plus a half a step, right? So you either have access so you can see everything in there, or you have access plus you have a little bit more power, which is admin, or you don't have access at all, and then that's it. So that's what you can manage in the team. With a company one, that gets a lot more interesting here, right? And so you have all these levers that you can toggle here. And I'm just gonna scroll here so you can see them all. Each one of these levers here can be toggled so that you can control, you can fine tune the level of access that any individual may or may not have. And so I wanna talk about a couple of important stuff for you to consider. First, administer projects should be fairly obvious. You want your administrators, like yourself, to be that administrator, right? Right now, the way this is configured is any logged in user can administer this project. So that's probably not a good idea. You're going to want to either define a user, a group, or a role to be able to administer. And again, we are going to go in depth into all of this in another series of videos. So please make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit that like button. And if you have any specific questions that I can help answer for you that I can include in that video, please make sure to drop them in the comments below. The administrator is going to be important because people that are given this permission, they just call it a permission, are the people that are going to be able to see this whole thing that we've been talking about this whole video, right? If you as an individual are not given this administer projects permission, this whole series of videos here that we've done, they're kind of pointless then, right? Because you wouldn't even be able to see them. If you want to be able to see this, then you need to make sure you have that administer projects role. Now, the next thing, and really the most important part here, is the browse projects. Now, the browse projects is, think of it like a bouncer at a nightclub. It's this security guard that sits in front of Jira and stops everybody and checks for IDs. And they're like, are you in the group role, or are you a user that has the ability to see this project? Okay, this is difficult to explain without examples, which is why I'm going to do a dedicated series just for this. But these, even though this is a scheme, the people part, right, which when we kind of talked about it at the beginning of that first video, so go back and look at that first video. But the people that you define in people then work in tandem with the groups, users, and roles defined on the right here, so that each individual project is going to, when Timmy comes in and logs in, right, and he wants to see this project, Jira's going to go, okay, Timmy, I see that in people you were given a role of X, and then I'm going to come to my browse projects and I'm going to go, okay, is that role X allowed to see this project? If the answer is no, guess what, Timmy? Tough luck, you're not going to be able to see the project. You can still have an account in Jira, you can still see things in Jira depending on what Timmy is allowed to see. But specific projects perspective, if that user doesn't meet the qualifications that are defined on the right, the permission on the left will not happen. And let me generalize that because that applies to every rule here, right? But I'm just saying that the browse project is the most important one because you don't need to fine tune like this managed sprints, this every assignable user, all that. I don't necessarily have to fine tune it if I have a really good block at the gate. Because if I can control the access to the project and then basically say, okay, once the bouncer in my club has deemed you safe and worthy, you can come in and now you have full access to the buffet. Otherwise, you don't, right? And so there's a different ways of like viewing this. And if you have very specific needs, right, again, make sure you're subscribed and you like this video, because I'm going to go in depth into how all these things work. And if you don't have the time, right, but you want your security for your Jira projects, in the description you're going to find a link to my website. I'm available for hire. So the browse projects here is going to be very important, right? Because again, if you get this part right, then the rest of it doesn't matter too much. I mean, it's still important, but it's not as important, because now only the right people are in your project. And most teams are going to be in a collaborative nature anyways. So you just want to let the team into the project, but keep everybody else out. Because once the team's inside the club, right, you want them to be able to sign issues. You want them to be able to close things. You want them to create. The one thing I'll caveat here is you might not want them to delete. So you might want to have your delete issues to still be reserved for an administrator. I don't recommend just ever be deleted in Jira, because it's a bad practice. You can either reassign the issue to somebody else if it was incorrectly assigned, or you can basically change every field in the ticket to make it a new ticket without having to delete it. And that history at least is preserved, right? Because that's the important part, is preserving that history. Delete issues is probably the only thing that I would recommend you give an administrator. Everything else here, I think it's pretty safe for everybody else to be able to do it. Now, I will talk about, again, there's another delete comment. So anything delete really, I would have just the administrators do. There's something about work logs. And so Jira has a built-in time tracker. Again, too big of a topic for this video, so we're going to have a dedicated series just on time tracking. But this is something you want to pay attention, right? You don't want anybody to just be able to delete all the work logs. So you want to reserve this to maybe even site administrators. Lots of levers to toggle here. We're going to go in depth into each one of these and kind of explain what these all are in a separate video. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the like button on this video. And again, if you have any specific comments or questions about any of these things, drop them in the comments and I'll make sure to include them in that future video. So that pretty much wraps it up for permissions. Let's go to issue security. All right, what is issue security? So this is a very interesting topic. It is a very careful topic that I want to talk about. You need a site administrator, so I'm going to give you just a high level overview. Assuming that you took my advice from what we just talked about, the whole browse projects, bouncer at the club thing. So now let's assume that somebody came into the club, but you still want to kind of keep things separated. You want the dessert table and you want only dessert people to touch the dessert table. You want the appetizers table to be touched by only the people that should be touching the appetizers table. And so with issue level security, you can do that. You can define each individual entry into Jira. You can define who can or cannot access that specific issue. Now you want to be very careful, because if you do this wrong, you have the potential to lock yourself out of your issues, and you don't want to do that. So you want to be very prescriptive of the tactic and strategy that you do to do issue level security. It's not impossible and it's hard, but it's something that if you just think about it for a half a second rather than just clicking away, it's going to save you some headache. And so again, I can't talk too much detail because these are, one, I'm in the free plan, and two, I'm going to just do a very dedicated video where I'm going to actually give you examples and actually walk you through how to do it. But I just wanted to mention it, right, that if you have a requirement, right, if this is something that you need where you're looking at your Jira issues and you're like, man, I have contractors or other stakeholders that they should only be able to see a specific issue and I don't want them to see every issue in my project, you can achieve that by leveraging issue security. Let's talk about notifications. Notifications are interesting because these are probably one of the more annoying things of Jira. The number of emails that you get out of Jira can be overwhelming sometimes, right? And so you can do notifications at two levels, right? You can manage your own notifications through personal settings, right? You can pick what kind of emails you get. If you haven't configure these, I don't even think I've talked about this just yet, but you can basically modify your notifications, right? You can tell them don't send me any, right? You can turn that off completely, or you can just deselect some checkboxes here. So that's very personalized. And at the project level, however, you can control this, right? And there's a scheme so that other projects can share it, or you can just customize just this one. But what you get here is, again, levers that you can pull here so that when an issue is created, you can control if a specific user or group or just anybody, you can control who should be getting notifications, right? So by default, I would say 98% of all the projects that I've that I basically configured or helped set up, they just keep the defaults. But every once in a while, I'll get a couple of customers or clients where they want like a group of people to be notified when an issue is created, or they want something else happening, right? And so this is where you would come and do that. Again, I don't recommend you change this too much because there's already a big problem, in my opinion, with the number of emails that you're getting from Jira, that some people just ignore them. And when you're ignoring emails like this, it loses its value, right? And so you want to just make sure that whatever decisions you're making here, you're not going to shy or turn off people's reaction to the notifications, right? You want the right balance of notifications going out, because if you have too many, people are just going to toss them. If you have not enough, people aren't going to know what's going on and they're not going to have the appropriate level of communication. So you want to play with this to get it just right for you and your organization. Let's go to development tools. And we're going to talk about this just very briefly because I don't have examples yet, but we'll definitely be connecting to a variety of different tools. And if you remember from my introductory video, right, I got hundreds of videos planned here, so we are definitely going to be talking about this. But high level overview is you have the ability to connect to Bamboo, which is your like build configuration stuff made by Atlassian. You have the ability to connect to Bitbucket Cloud or Bitbucket Server, which is Atlassian's version of their like Git client or Git service, if you will. You have Fisheye and Crucible, right? These are for your code reviews. If you're not using Bitbucket, if you're not using Git, then you would want to use Fisheye or Crucible because those are how you do like subversion control and how you do the source control management, and the peer review process gets merged into just that Bitbucket project. But if you're not, then you're going to want to leverage maybe Fisheye Crucible. And then finally, if you're a team that already on GitHub, right, and your entire code base is in GitHub, you're going to want to then talk about GitHub Enterprise and connecting there. At the very minimum, I recommend you absolutely connect your Git to Jira. It helps you tremendously. It gives you some extra metadata on the issue itself. It allows you to look at those PRs. It makes your team more accountable because now they're working on code that is tied back to a ticket. For them to make any changes to the code base, there has to be a ticket, and ideally that ticket was then created with some higher purpose in mind, right? And so now you don't have just like wishy-washy anybody doing whatever they want to the code base, right? Now you have a team, a structured team, organized, marching towards a goal or a direction, right? And so you get that visibility when you connect to these tools. So that's pretty much all I'll talk about here, because we're going to wrap this video up here really quickly. But again, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, because I am going to be walking you through how to connect to Bamboo, how to connect to Bitbucket, how to connect to Fisheye, and how to connect to GitHub. So if you aren't subscribed, you're going to want to subscribe because we have a lot of great content coming your way. Let's finish up here with issue collectors. So an issue collector is something that I have never used. So I'm not even going to lie. 100% of the projects that I've coached have never used this. So let's read through this and let me see if it even makes sense, because I'm not going to lie to you. I have never made it this far down on my permissions, right? Or my settings of managing projects, right? I literally never seen a team use this, but I think it's valuable, right? Because it allows you to easily gather feedback on any website in the form of Jira issues. So even from users that don't have Jira accounts. So once you've configured the look and feel of an issue collector, simply embed the generated JavaScript in any website. Visitors to your website will see a trigger they can click on to raise bugs, and it will get a form directly in your web app to provide more details. Then watch the feedback appear in the form of Jira issues. So this is kind of cool if you have like a website and you don't want to have Jira Service Management, because Jira Service Management is really designed to do this at a much more powerful scale from like a customer service perspective. But if you just want to quick and dirty collect some issues because you just created a new website or a new product and you just want some feedback on some bugs, right? This is a great way to do this. Again, most of my clients, they're paying the extra money to have that Jira Service Management portal and that whole intake form and everything that's around that. But that is an added cost and it's a slightly more expensive. So if you don't want to do that and you just want to capture again information or some bugs, this is going to be the way. Drop a comment and let me know if this is something you're interested in. I'll definitely go make a video. And then the final thing we'll talk about here to wrap this video up is Slack integration. So I'm kind of on the fence about this, right? So Slack is super, super powerful, right? It's a great communication tool, but I just don't feel like, as much as I love it, I just don't feel that that integration is just there the way I would like for it to have some value, right? I mean, it's a good integration and it's going to get you places, but I just feel like there's something missing. I can't put my tongue on it, but what you do get, the ability to mention issues in Slack. When you mention a ticket number, you'll then get like a URL or a link or a hyperlink to bring you back to Jira so that your team doesn't have to, like, the context, right? It's all about that context focus, right? So if they're in Slack and you send them, hey, have you taken a look at this issue? You can Slack it to them. They'll have a link in their Jira will pop up, right? Versus them going over to their browser, opening up Jira, and then trying to find the ticket, right? And doing the search. So that, from that perspective, I mean, seconds, right, eventually add up over hundreds of thousands of people, right? So money. That's one. Two, you can create Slack channels so that specific, when, like, you can manage or monitor activity. So as people are creating issues, you can see the issues pop up, or if something fails, right? If there's like a failure or something happening, like, you can do so many conditions, right? We'll talk about it in much more detail when we do the series on automation rules, but you can very fine tune and be very prescriptive as to what data is shown in Slack. You have to consider your team might not always be in Jira, right? But they might always be in Slack, because at least I always have Slack open. And so I'm not sure how, if you're a Slack managed company, this might be like a godsend for you then, right? Because this is powerful, just depends on the workflow and the type of communication you do with your team. With that said, I would say like 70% of the projects or the clients that I coach, they don't have this Slack integration. A lot of teams do try to do it, right? It's one of these novel things where teams will set it up, or they'll ask me to set it up, or they'll set up Microsoft Teams, but then they don't use it, right? It's like the novelty wears off type of thing. And so just your mileage is going to vary with this, but I definitely worked with teams where we've used this effectively, and it does increase that transparency and collaboration and just overall convenience of being able to toggle between where your mindset is at that moment versus coming back into Jira. That pretty much wraps it up for this video. I know we've covered a lot of different settings here, so if you have any questions about anything, make sure you drop a comment, make sure you subscribe, make sure you drop a like. And if you need help with any of this, reach out to me, right? I do consider myself Dr. Jira, working on my brand. And I'm here to help you, right? I'm here to help you solve these complex Jira problems. I'm here to take these headaches that Jira is giving you and take them away. So if you feel that this is something I can help you with, make sure you reach out, right? I'd be more than happy to come into your organization, have a quick sit down with you, understand your problems, and then offer my recommendations. And then if you want, I can also even help fix them for you. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be very happy to help you out. So that's going to be it for this video. Make sure you subscribe, because I got a lot of videos coming your way, as I alluded in this video. And next, in my next series, we're going to start going in depth into the site level administration. So you're not going to want to miss out on that. So make sure you subscribe. Thanks. Bye.